You just have to accept the fact that you're a partisan in this fight, and some partisans don't make it.
One thing
We'd
that
be lucky.
also
Oh, go ahead.
One thing that also worries me is that law enforcement, especially at the federal level, doesn't really seem to take these groups as seriously as they do, a bunch of idiots who just want to like go shoot guns in the wood and talk about like base stuff. And what I'm starting to worry about is, what's out there that we like don't know about just because no one's really looking for it, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know. I I see these kinds of people, these kinds of groups as a very serious threat, and their capacity for the kind of damage they could do in a shit hit the fan scenario should not be underestimated.
And in case you think that's a scenario like that isn't likely, um, Trump's world economy reorganization with the tariffs, I think, maybe he's not gonna fully commit to that, but that's an indication as to how fragile our current supply chain based existence is. You know, even if they're interrupted, even if they're slightly stalled, what is it like? The civilization's 3 meals away from collapse, right? Even if you have a temporary disruption of food going to places, you start seeing violence. And I think we'd be lucky if it was just a bunch of Chazes because but why was Chaz allowed to continue existing and was given all sorts of social media coverage? Why was the National Guard, was why did Trump not send the National Guard to eliminate it? Because I think Trump was Trump still president at that time? I was in basic training when Chaz.
He was. That was during
Okay,
his presidency.
yeah, so I missed all that because I was at basic training, funnily enough. Um, but who who why was the National Guard not sent in to basically get rid of this theoretically this revolution against state power, this setting up of an alternative state power? Because it wasn't an alternative state power at all. Like Pete said, it was a color revolution. Chaz was purposely set up or was allowed to continue existing. You know, whether it was purposely set up or not, it was allowed to continue existing. And it was given all kinds of media coverage all over the country. It's a demoralization technique. It's meant to demoralize. It's meant to show, oh, there's nothing that we can do. There's chaos and anarchy in the cities, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think they have that kind of power anymore because by the grace of God, Trump is in the White House. But the fight is far from over. Everyone, since election day, everyone's been like, "Oh, well, what happened to the left? Where's the left? What's going on with the left, et cetera, et cetera." And I've said things like, the left is in shambles, and in a lot of cases it is. But like any army that's shattered, that has its morale broken and loses a major battle, they can regroup, they can reorganize, and they can hit you again. And
People
Trump is
think
not.
people
Yeah,
think
go ahead,
because
Pete.
USAID has been. I mean, we don't know what USAID is doing. It was turned over to the Secretary of State. We have no idea, but that doesn't matter. George Soros doesn't need USAID. Bill Gates doesn't need USAID. Billionaires you've never heard of don't need USAID. All they need to do is find a way, and I know of certain ways that you can move money around that's just untraceable, and not just cryptocurrency. So people are sleeping on the fact that there are groups out there that are planning something. And you know, it's hard for us to believe because I mean, most most of us are sleeping soundly at night, not worrying about anything. Sure, we might have a gun next to the bed, but that's for the intruder. What about the mob? And then, somebody in the comments is going to be like, well, that's why I have 30 round magazines. Okay, well, and you shoot the first one and the rest of them scatter until they don't. They didn't do that in Spain. So be prepared.
So on that, it's very important to study the Spanish Civil War and the Russian Civil War as examples of, because they're so close together. And I know they're in different countries, different cultures, different sizes, different people, but the circumstances which led to them were so similar and the outcomes were so different. It's important to study both. Like that was at Kent State. That was by the way, Kent State was the National Guard's finest moment, everyone, just so you know. What are the chances that they ended up I mean, except for that one poor ROTC guy that got killed. He was just, he was just walking. But for the rest, I mean, man. Anyway,
Dude, I can J post every live stream, and that's probably what's going to get this demonetized.
Whatever. But specifically speaking to Spain, right? To what you talked about with Spain, what differentiated Spain from Russia is that the military was number one. Like the communists, I think in the preceding years were more or less sidelined from the Spanish military, and they were not allowed to penetrate at least the high levels of high command. And number two, under Emilio Mola, there was a very decisive coup and grabbing of ground that was done by a variety of and a lot of generals who just kind of acted on their own initiative in a unified front. This did not occur in Russia. In Russia, the response by the military was very disjointed. There were all kinds of infiltrators. But it was so well done for the Spanish that they were able to airlift the entirety of Franco's elite Moroccan army from the Spanish Africa provinces into mainland Spain, which proved to be the X factor for on the ground confrontation. And the reason that I believe that the Spanish nationalists, the side of truth and the side of sanity, were, by the grace of God, allowed to be victorious in the Spanish Civil War was because of the competency and the professionalism and the unity of force within the military, which leads us to our final topic this evening, which is recently one of my favorite things that Trump has done since starting was appointing Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. I think it was one of his most, I know he was a Fox and Friends guy, I get it. But if you look at his combat record and you look at what he's done, he was leading a platoon in Iraq. Or was it Afghanistan? It was one of the two. But he was an infantry platoon leader. He still serves, or I think up until being appointed Secretary of Defense, he still served in the National Guard. He has been known for his extremely radical views within the Department of Defense community. And I think that's why Trump picked him, just simply because he was a well-known military man with radical views. And he's done a lot of great things. For example, he recently raised combat standards. I think we talked about this in another Pony Express stream, but he raised combat standards for combat units, physical fitness standards to the male level universally. Females now must comply with the male PT test, which is a soft ban on women in combat because they just simply, it's standards they can't meet. So what you're seeing is on the lower levels in the frontline units, you're seeing a massive increase in quality. I heard he recently cut something like 90,000 officers out of the U.S. military. Like he's ending their contracts and things like that. This is excellent. This is great. But what our story that we're specifically talking about is I believe that there were some leaks that came from the Pentagon as to what they were doing from very high up general staff officials that were discovered, and I believe some generals have been fired because of that.
Well, we knew there was leaks. We knew that they had to be found. We knew that they were embedded deep, and I mean, at least we know of some of them. But I mean, when you take into consideration the deep state and these people who work at the Pentagon and they, no matter who's president, they work there. Same at the State Department, same, the entrenched deep state. You, we have to assume that it's still leaking like a sieve there. So, you know, there's a lot more work to do if it can be fixed at all. And I'm of the opinion that it can't be fixed, and I know where we're headed, and I think that's what the OGC is all about, is getting ready for that, and that's why we concentrate on local chapters.